So, Ambassador, thank you very much for affording us the opportunity to speak to you, and we really value this respect. Firstly, we would want to start by you telling the people of Zimbabwe how important is assuming the SADC Chairmanship. What does it mean to the people of Zimbabwe?
Well, first, I would like to congratulate our President, Dr. Emmerson Mnangagwa, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, for assuming the rotational chairmanship of SADC. There was a lot of heat and a lot of huffing and puffing, leading up to the assumption of the chairmanship of Zimbabwe. But that as it may, this last weekend, on the 17th of August, everything went smooth, and President Mnangagwa became the chairman of SADC. It was a glorious occasion with the maximum attendance of heads of states ever for a very long time. So this is a testing to the prestige and the standing of Zimbabwe among its regional peers, that so many heads of states came, and even our neighbor Zambia, they sent the representation at the foreign minister level, and the president himself did attend as the chairman of the SADC Troika on defense and security. He did attend virtually, and there was a smooth handover of that position to the next chairman. And in all the deliberations which we had, there was no rancor among states. All decisions were done by consensus, and more important, there was a communique where there was no dissenting voice to any of the proceedings which went on. Indeed, one of the smoothest SADC meetings which we've had. So this is a reflection of the stature of our president as an elder statesman with a long history of the region, with lots of institutional memory. Remember, he comes from the pioneer young recruits of the national liberation of that Samora Machel Soweto generation, which fought for independence, freedom, and democracy against racism, against apartheid, against settler minority rule, against colonial rule. So we do have a soul, a political soul as a region, which goes beyond our neighborhood, which goes beyond our historical affinities. The recent struggles, they bound us, they gave us a political soul, which no other sub-regional organization in the world today enjoys. So decisions are much easier because we speak from the same mind and we read from the same script. So it was a good summit.
That must be a well done for Zimbabwe.
Yes.
But now, people like who are in Berengwa, where I come from, what are they going to benefit from Zimbabwe's assuming of the chairmanship of the region?
Well, we will put a Zimbabwean accent to the shared ideals and aspirations and goals of SADC. The rotating chairman means that at any one particular time, those issues which a particular nation wants to pursue within the common agenda of SADC, they get an impetus, a drive from that particular nation. And in the instance of Zimbabwe, we are a landlocked nation, and the issues of logistics are very important, linkages of Zimbabwe to the overseas markets. If you look at the past 6 decades, the challenge for Zimbabwe has been to having an affordable access to the sea. When it was in colonial Rhodesia, they used Beira because there was a common understanding between the British Empire and the Portuguese Empire. So 600 kilometers to Beira, you had access to the global market. But when the National Liberation Movement came into vogue and started fighting, there's been concerted efforts to make sure that Zimbabwe is, as much as possible, given an inflation factor in its development agenda, a negative inflation factor in its development agenda, through stretching its lines of logistics and communications to the sea.
Ambassador, you know, this is not the first time Zimbabwe is assuming the chairmanship of the region. What would you say, or would you like to give us a comparative analysis of what happened previously when Zimbabwe did assume the chairmanship and what did not happen, and now Zimbabwe again assuming the chairmanship? What differences are we going to see?
Well, there are differences. That's what I'm getting to, that we are going to put emphasis on shortening our logistical lines to the sea, as a gateway to the world, to the sea, to world trade. We want the restoration of central Mozambique as the natural gateway of Zimbabwe. It's a restoration. It used to be there in colonial times. It was removed during the independence struggles and post-independence, when the dominant West wanted us to depend on Durban in South Africa, 2,000 kilometers away. And you can imagine the inflation factor just from logistics. A container leaves New York $1,000, it's in Durban. It leaves Shanghai $800, it's in Durban. Then you truck it by rail or road to Harare. By the time we get to Harare, it's $3,000, $4,000, let alone going all the way to the DRC. So by restoring central Mozambique as the natural gateway for Zimbabwe, we shorten that. And that is now even more possible because we have since restored Zimbabwe. We are restoring, and we have since restored and are restoring Zimbabwe as an economic hinterland for Mozambique. If you see what is happening at Manise, when you cannot produce steel and most of it for export, then sell it to the global markets through trucks and by road. You can't do that. You have to do it by rail. So the advent of Zimbabwe as the chairman of SADC will see us having closer links with Mozambique and attracting investment which is equivalent or even more than that we are getting for the and that will reduce Zimbabwe's that will restore Zimbabwe's competitiveness, because our products can go to the world market much faster and quicker and cheaply.
And on that note, Ambassador, you heard what the AFDB boss said during the industrial week.
Yes.
Raised concern on Zimbabwe's rail infrastructure,
yes,
and how that can derail the region's business and investment aspirations. How would you like to comment on that?
Yes, they are spot on, you know. But remember, there was no reason to invest in rail infrastructure as long as there was no economic hinterland in Zimbabwe, which then would support the balance sheet of railway lines, of railway development. It wasn't there for quite some time, you know, even in the First Republic, because at that time we relied much more on the Western countries for financing, and they were not prepared to finance infrastructure for cross connectivity in Africa. I mean, this is a colonial heritage, a post-colonial heritage. All railways in Africa for the past 100 years, they've been built from the capital city to the port and then to the metropolitan center in Europe. There were no interconnecting railway lines among African states because they didn't serve the empires which were running Africa, the Portuguese, the French, and the British, or even South African apartheid. So now, with what is happening within the Zimbabwe in particular, the amount of investment in the last 4 or 5 years in our mining sector, there is now a real opportunity to develop a cross-connecting African infrastructure which can increase intra-African trade. Because if you don't have interconnectivity between African countries, you can't trade. That's why the trade between African countries is so low. Because we were made to think that linking with Europe was more important than linking with your neighbor. But with Zimbabwe, is changing that whole template with what we are doing right now. We are going to see much more accent on infrastructure to connect Zimbabwe with its neighbors. And that way we also increase trade among our neighbors. The goods will be cheaper. But we also trade cheaply with the global community, because Beira is much nearer to Harare than
for interest's sake, Ambassador, why is our railway infrastructure is so bad in our country, perhaps 44 years after we gained our independence? Is it because we didn't have foresight? Why are we in this state?
Look, it's a historical thing where negative policies over 6 decades actually made sure that the railway infrastructure collapsed. The first big mistake was the collapse of the federation, which means there were no more economies of scale between Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi in 1963. The second biggest mistake was UDI, which then the United Nations sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. Then in 1976, the war starts, and the border is closed because now Mozambique and Rhodesia were at war. So the border was closed. So it saw the collapse of Beira and even Mutare as a gateway for Zimbabwean trade. Post-independent, there was the Renamo factor. Remember, the Renamo was deployed simply to make sure that there was no connectivity between Mozambique and Zimbabwe as newly independent states. That's why South African apartheid deployed Renamo in Mozambique. So let's not forget these things which happened because of the antipathy to the national liberation movement by the West. Then afterwards, we also had generally, negative policies by the First Republic, where wrong-handed indigenization and killed the export of chrome and decimated the mining sector.
At some point, you were part of the government.
I only was there for a few months. Okay. I remember I've never served in the Zimbabwean government for any period more than 18 months. I haven't done so because I always think differently. So
otherwise, your input could have been very impactful.
Well, in the event, it did, because I'm the one who has worked so hard to get the steel plant at Banise be where it is today. We're a world-class investor in steel manufacturing. Is now put a plant which is the best on the African continent today, with the up-to-date technology, and also developing a lot of skills, local skills. So we are now going to see Zimbabwe, revive itself many times over as a steel producing company, many times over what Cisco used to do. We're probably going to go to 20 to 200 times bigger than Cisco in steel production. And now when you have steel production, it's a whole ecosystem from Wange, where the coking coal is, to the ports in Beira, from where the cocoa, the limestone, from various parts of Zimbabwe, and also the ore itself. And all these things, they cannot be moved by truck. They have to be moved by rail. So what it creates a balance sheet for the railway company of Zimbabwe to go to the banks and say, we can now look for money to fund railway infrastructure, because the banks know that there are products and services, goods and services, which are being produced to pay for the...
Ambassador, I want to close this section, but I want you to tell the people of Zimbabwe how maybe employment opportunities are going to come because of SADC. Yeah. The Z currency, how is it going to behave? Because now we have assumed SADC chairmanship, and also other sectors like even our health. How are we going to benefit as the people of Zimbabwe with this assumption of SADC chairmanship?
Look, what we are now is becoming an industrial power, a heavy industry country with lithium, with steel. Yeah, and also generally with logistics being made cheaper for the industries of Zimbabwe. They'll be more competitive. If you become more competitive, you sell more. If you sell more, you employ more. So this is good for the GDP of the country. And also steel makes it possible to have so many downstream industries. There's going to be a situation where widgets will be manufactured in Zimbabwe, for the export market, all sorts of widgets, because whenever a company like Tsingshan doing steel in Zimbabwe, Toyota follows, Mercedes-Benz follows, Nissan follows, Ford follows, because of the quality of steel. So we are going to, these are all, but all these things, they need logistics to be exported competitively.
Yeah, but so these are the things. How is all this connected to us assuming the chairmanship? Because I think we could have simply done that even if we didn't have the...
when we have already done it as part of SADC. Remember, we are part of SADC. When we were doing it, even when we were not a chairman, we were doing it in concert with our neighbors. But when we become chairman, we put an accent to those things. And we are, for Zimbabwe in particular, because we are a landlocked country, we are looking at even closer links to Mozambique. We are getting to a situation where the bilateral relationship between Zimbabwe and Mozambique becomes a comprehensive partnership. We actually may even have we surpass the joint commission. We have a bilateral arrangement similar to between France and Germany, which formed the EU. So this is going to get a big push. We are just now waiting for the elections in Mozambique so that we reach out to the new leadership of Frelimo, and hopefully they will win. And you will see the magic which is going to come out of the synergies obtained between Harare and Maputo, and how they are going to impact logistics, all this in the sub-region, all the way to the Congo. We are talking about the ZIG. The ZIG is a product of young people digging gold in Zimbabwe. The more we dig gold, the more the ZIG gets support, because it is a gold-based currency. Gold has been currency for the world for the past 5,000 years, unlike all the other fiat currencies, including the US dollar. Now, Zimbabwe has been a gold country since millennia. Somehow, by dint of God, we have so much gold. And when young people dig, the more we dig, the more we support the ZIG. So there's this is obviously in SADC, if we can provide a good currency, a stable currency in terms of our exports, it means our businessmen can plan better. It means we bring competitive advantage against the inflation factor which was associated with a depreciating currency. So these are good things which we look forward to.
Let's move to the next important aspect, the issue of human rights in this country. Would you agree that they are deteriorating human rights in this country?
Look, this issue of human rights has been a scarecrow. It has been a red herring simply by pushed as a deviant agenda by those who are unhappy with the National Liberation Movement as the ruling government of Zimbabwe. The most atrocious records of human rights in this country are in the colonial era. Atrocious, really atrocious. That's why a whole generation had to sacrifice. Out of every 5 people who went to war, only came back alive. What were they fighting for? Democracy, human rights, and freedom. That's what they fought for. To then come around and then try to judge those people who delivered that freedom by the standards of the same countries which were responsible for the most atrocious travesty ever visited upon Africa. It's untenable. But this is what the pain of Zimbabwe right now, because the Western countries are not happy that Zimbabwe established a state which had nothing to do with, which was against the will of the West. That's the main thing. So all sorts of NGO organizations are sponsored. Per capita, I think Zimbabwe as a country has more NGOs operating in its social body politic than any other country on earth. Why? Because people want to restore the regime of Cecil John Rhodes. That's all. This is what the West stands for. They profited from Cecil John Rhodes when he was the ruler of Southern Africa, including Zimbabwe, and they still hanker for that time when they were running the roost in Southern Africa. It's never going to come back.
But is Zimbabwe really fragile that way?
We don't even have a war. We don't even have a war in Zimbabwe. We have neighboring countries in Africa. We never try to speak against when things go wrong in other African countries. There is a country which have just said 50 people killed in demonstrations on the African continent. No, not even a whimper from the West about that particular country. We have a neighboring country where 400 people died in disturbances. It's an African country. We are all African countries. We all have challenges about how we are developing our democracy. So we sympathize with them. But you look at the double standards of the West. There is not even any mention of those excesses in those particular African countries. Why? Because Zimbabwe is a different kettle of fish for them. We took back our resources, we put a new state apparatus which they don't like.
Let's narrow down these two.
We cannot be
narrow down these two, the crackdown on human rights defenders and political activists in the run-up to the SADC summit.
Look, those were mischief makers. You don't wait for a particular event on the calendar of a country, a regional event of such importance, then you want to put on your deviant show on that particular day. That's called mischief, and mischief was held as it should be, mischief. Now that the show is over, why do we continue to be preoccupied with the mischief makers? Let's focus on things which do matter. You don't wait for the day when your mother and father are putting on a good show with the neighbors. And
but Ambassador, peaceful protests are allowed by our constitution. Section 59 allows people to peacefully protest.
Law and order is also allowed in our constitution. When people, when they are holding events of major importance on a day-to-day basis, they must be given a chance to do what is good, and that is the norm in a country. What you are trying to say is to abuse the constitution to accommodate deviant behavior. We will not allow that. That is called mischief and deviant behavior, which was happening, and we are a state born of painful struggles. We know when mischief is afoot, and when we see it, we deal with it accordingly.
How do you respond to people who say you just use lawfare to persecute people? I'll give you one example. Job Scala spent close to 2 years in jail, and only to be acquitted by the High Court.
Look, these are, again, these are people who never accept that Zimbabwe can run a democracy. They never accept that Zimbabwe can run an election. They use the standard of the West to try to make themselves be relevant to the Zimbabwe people, notwithstanding that they are constantly rejected in elections. They've never been able to make it to the electoral landscape of Zimbabwe. And when the result does come out, they don't want it. They put the country on mark time because they lost an election. So we're in mark time for the next 5 years until we get into another election. We cannot be episodic, moving only on one particular item. There is a whole gamut of issues which happen in a state. Why focus on a particular one which just caters for your own narrow interests?
But do you accept responsibility that in the case of Job Scala, that was a pure political persecution because he was found not guilty?
No. Job Scala, with everybody watching, tried to organize an uprising. Everybody knows that. He was, even remember the other time he was in a ceiling saying, I'm running a guerrilla army. In a ceiling. You remember?
Oh, is that possible?
Yeah, you go to ask him. That's why the police eventually fished him out and he dropped from the ceiling. He was becoming a general Tongogara in the
Yes, but the question is, then the court said the man is innocent. So this is why I keep on coming back to you to say this is lawfare.
Well, the courts incidentally are part of the constitution of Zimbabwe. So if we have the courts giving judgments on those issues, it means that this country is a law-abiding country with different arms of government, the executive, the legislature, and the courts doing their work. So you just gave a compliment to the political system of Zimbabwe, that one particular institution in that particular country made a ruling on a certain issue. I don't know the merits of it, but here we are having democracy on three pedestals: legislature, executive, and the courts, contending with each other to make sure that the laws of the land are abided with. That's a good thing.
Yeah, but let's look at the case of Jameson Timber, perhaps, and the 70-something others.
Look,
we know that it's a matter which is still before the court, but the question that I want to bring to your attention is they were arrested while they were at a private residence having a meeting. And we, on the other side, we have also ZANU PF having its functions and meetings, sometimes even marches in the countryside at any point of a country, but they are not arrested. So
there's never been a situation where ZANU PF does certain things which are against the law and they are left. Because if they are done with the capacity of ZANU PF, this country will be chaos. So generally, let's accept that ZANU PF makes sure that there is general law and order in the land. If ZANU PF were to behave just an iota of what the opposition has been doing with its capacity, with its organizational capacity, which it has over the years. Remember, this is a part which has been around for more than 6 decades. This country will not be governable.
But the question, Ambassador, is the selective application of the law. Why is your party allowed to have demonstrations and marches when the opposition is not allowed? I want you to comment on the selection.
If the laws of the land are not threatened, then people are free to march and do as they want, because we need law and order in a country. You cannot have a lawless country. The reason why you come here to this building safely and come and interview me is that there's law and order in this country. We lose that law and order, you will be scared to even come to this building. The reason why all these embassies are here and they love to be in Zimbabwe is because we're a law and order country. So if there is behavior by certain political parties which threatens that law and order, and it is against the constitution of the land, then the state has a duty to protect the Zimbabwean people from deviant behavior. We cannot be judged simply by satisfying Timber or Job's Color about their proclivities for mischief. We are not there to abate and to acquiesce to deviant behavior. We want order and the law-abiding citizens to be allowed to do what they should. ZANU PF does not threaten the people of Zimbabwe at their work.
Ambassador, you have attended the United Nations General Assembly, which is coming next month.
Yes.
You have seen that there is definitely a space for people who will be peacefully protesting. Why can't you allow that in this country for people to peacefully protest?
You know, there was an election in America 3 years ago. And that election degenerated into violence, that election. And the American state had to intervene before the whole world. This is the ultimate democratic country because its body politic was being threatened. So the state came in. So if you just want to look for incidences, there are incidences to satisfy any argument which you want. But ultimately, the question is, the state must be allowed to let orderliness and law-abiding citizens be given a chance to do their business without being disturbed. And because the opposition in this country is there for regime change, they don't subscribe to a government which is owed to the National Liberation Movement. That's why they were created. They were not there before the advent of independence. They are post-independent products.
But there are some also war veterans who are in the opposition right now.
Look, people can choose, but by and large, most of the war veterans, they belong to the party which stands for the ideals which they fought for. But ultimately, the most important thing is we go to elections, you go into an election, you lose, and you don't want to accept the result. Then afterwards, you want to say you're a Democrat. No, you are not. The first sign of a Democrat is you accept the results. Trump knows it to his cost when you don't accept the results of a democratic election. Trump, the president of America. And this is the most supposedly democratic country with which I respect. I went to school there. I respect America. I went to school there. They are very democratic. But when the body politic of America comes under threat, the state comes to its defense.
Let's look to the issue of the economy in our country. And I will just go straight into one of the cancers that have destroyed the economy of this country is corruption. And the National Prosecutor General have said earlier this year that Zimbabwe is losing nearly $2 billion United States dollars because of corruption. Would you accept the responsibility that it is today's government which is not really nailing in the body this disease?
The government of Zimbabwe is doing all the best it can to make sure that there is that there is less corruption, and culprits are being investigated and brought to courts. That's precisely why you can quote the figure which you did. This figure is coming from the National Prosecuting Authority. I'm talking. These are your words. This is not coming from some foreign organization. It is coming from a government entity. That shows that there's a government which is consciously aware of the cancer which you are talking about. Therefore, it is tackling it. That's why the information is available to you in the public domain from a government institution, the NPA. So, heads off, give kudos for the Zimbabwean government to be examining and exposing this corruption to the scale which you have given of the figures which you have just cited. But that as it may, every society has got corruption. every society. It's not something which is peculiar to Zimbabwe. I know, like I say, I lived in America for 6 years. Everybody knows that the mafia runs the cement industry of America year in and year out. You know, this has been there for a long time. That's why also America has got very strong anti-corruption laws, because they know that there's always a threat of corruption. So the mere fact that America has similar laws, it shows an acknowledgement of the cancer of corruption in America. And this is, so look, this is part of the human failing. You know, it's human levity which we are dealing with. So, you know, let's not make it as if it is corruption is a peculiar Zimbabwean disease. But like I say, heads off to the fact that Zimbabwean government could actually investigate and give out the figures which we are talking about. And you know, what is now required is to apply the resources so that the scourge can be contained. Definitely very difficult to eradicate.
Yeah, that's
but
so you and me are on one side now.
Yeah.
So that takes away the sanctions excuse from the picture in terms of how, if our economy can lose $2 billion, this is a huge amount that can make changes in the lives of the people in this country.
You are getting mixed up, Paul. You know, you are mixing apples with matamba. You know, the two things are not the same. Sanctions are about punishing a particular country because it does not want to comply with the tenets of a superpower which feels that it is the dominant financial and economic power in the world. So it decides. That's why they are unilateral. They are not even under auspices of the United Nations. So sanctions are about complying with the dictates of a foreign power running your own affairs. That's what sanctions are about. Corruption is about the failures of people within their own national body politic. The two things have no comparison.
I'm trying to look at it. You're losing $2 billion yearly. This is an astronomical figure. If you look at the railway system that we talked about earlier, we could have, if we have been losing that $2 billion yearly, and for the past 44 years now, we could have built our good railway system.
No. You're getting all mixed up. The things which like I say, you are mixing apples and matamba in one fruit basket. The issue about railways is about investment. It's about development. In fact, railways are mostly not built by governments in most countries.
But we could have done it on our own.
Railways are built by investors. Railways, they are built by investors, not governments, because that's why the capital markets exist. Most of the money for development in the world today is not in the pockets of government. I'm a finance student. You know how much world governments have under the IMF system globally? 7 trillion to 9 trillion US dollars for all their budgets. That's IMF. You go to Wall Street, you go to the Frankfurt Exchange, you go to the Tokyo Exchange, you go to London Stock Exchange, you get 90 trillion US dollars.
Why are we not getting investors to build our railway system?
I'm trying to make you understand where you must get money to build the railway system. It is not, you cannot use 2 billion it will not even address the deficit of the railways which Zimbabweans want. What we want, the reason why we are now talking about the revival of the railways is because a billionaire company has established itself, and there are 4 or 5 others who are exploiting lithium, billionaire companies, Fortune 500 companies. They are here now. This is now bringing big capital because the goods and services they are producing have to be taken to the world market. That's where you get your money to build ports. That's where you get money to build railways. That's where you get money to build power stations. That's where you get money to build reticulation for water down. That's where you get money to build towns. So try to get the measly figures which you are talking about from corruption as if they are the ones which can develop a country. It's totally misplaced. I am a student of global finance.
We've been mining gold for the past 4 years. We have had an opportunity to get diamond at some point. We have been having platinum. We have gotten all sorts of minerals. We've got over 50 of them. Why are we now banking on the Manise plant saying it is going to bring the fortunes when initially for the past years we have failed to utilize all these resources that have been at our disposal?
So the fact that you have failed in the past, does it mean that you can no longer succeed when you take the right decision at the right time? Just watch it. Going to see what's happening at Manize. It's a plant which is 20 to 30 times bigger than what Rhodesia offered to the world at Risco. You understand? I will ask you, why are these companies coming from China and India putting more investment in Zimbabwe, which all the colonial companies which the West stand for didn't put? Just look at what's happening in Southerton with Varun from India. And you compare with with another company, I won't mention their name. Coca-Cola was running for $1.80 at one time when we get to Christmas, a can, $1.80 per can. Varun is offering at 30 cents a can for the whole populace of Zimbabwe. They've even used Zimbabwe as a launching ground to other countries. This is alternative capital from other countries. This is what capital does when it is brought into a country. And who did that? The current Republic of Zimbabwe, the second Republic of President E.D. Mnangagwa. We are bringing the most competent capital into Zimbabwe today. That's why there is a new bullish mood in the Zimbabwean economy. Look at the construction. We have never consumed cement to the extent which we are doing today. We are doing in the whole history of this country. And if an economy can be so pulsating in its growth, it's so bullish, it means things are being done well. These things which you are trying to see, to see ulcers and boils on the body politic. Generally, the Zimbabwean economy is doing well under the Second Republic. It cannot be perfect all the way around, but it is doing very well. And it is going to confound you. And why is it going confounding? Because even the Western countries are now coming back. Listen to the American ambassador just 2 days ago. She was talking bullish about the Zimbabwean economy, saying your possibilities are limitless. Why? Words from a country which for the past 2 to 3 decades they've been talking about sanctions. Why have they changed the tech? Why have they changed the language? Because they see that good things are being done.
And it's the biggest funder so far in this country in terms of the health system.
What makes a country move forward is capital. Capital from the markets. New York, Tokyo, London, Shanghai, Mumbai. Not pittance from a particular government. It may be make changes for day-to-day life, but 4 billion.
No, Ambassador, this is a country that has been very persistent in terms of supporting this country in the health sector
of Zimbabwe,
and in other sectors actually. But I just mentioned
the capacity of Zimbabwe is to do much more than what can be done by an aid remittance from the American Congress and the American budget. Our capacity is way much bigger. We need capital. This is the age of capital. Karl Marx said this is the age of capital. You go to Wall Street, this is the age of capital. What America was trying to deny us was capital. What America is trying to offer us is aid. Aid doesn't change the life of a country. It doesn't. It only mitigates the suffering of a country. Capital changes the economic body politic of a country. That's what we want. I'm more interested in Wall Street coming to if the American government, like what the ambassador is now doing to encourage American businessmen to come to Zimbabwe, then is one on the same page with the President E.D. Mnangagwa, because we want capital to be applied on the resources which we are talking about. Those resources will not move an inch based on some budget from the American Congress. No. The resource, the platinum, the gold, the chrome, they will not move 1 inch. But you apply American capital, everything changes.
Ambassador, when one is coming in, obviously there will be a gap, isn't it? There is obviously a gap. If they are coming in to support your health sector, it means there is a gap that you can't cover.
If we develop our economy with capital, we don't need a cent from any particular government for our health system. We don't need. We have the capacity. We develop our own sinews to address those issues. What we want is a Zimbabwe which has got a very good endowment of resources, a Zimbabwe which has confounded the world by its human resource index, a product again of the National Liberation Movement. Why are we the most educated on the African continent? Because of the National Liberation Movement.
I wholly agree with you. What we have is capacity to...
So those things, now to deliver value out of those resources and out of that human resource, you need capital. The only thing which can deliver value out of this we are talking about, the human resource, and the resources of Zimbabwe, the natural resources, is capital. It's not American aid. American aid, it pales into insignificance compared to the capacity which Zimbabwe can deliver if it's allowed access to Wall Street, if it's allowed Wall Street to Tokyo, it's allowed Wall Street to Frankfurt, if it's allowed Wall Street to Mumbai, Shanghai. This is where change comes in the economic body politic of a country, not some budget of a country, no matter how generous it may think it is. It does not change the life of people.
Let's move to the last section, Ambassador. We need to wrap up this interview. The ZANU PF definite transition that will come after President Mnangagwa has more than twice said he will honor the constitution by stepping down in 2028. Can the people of Zimbabwe be guaranteed that when this transition when it comes, it's going to be peaceful?
The people of Zimbabwe can rest easy in total comfort that the transition in Zimbabwe will be smooth. Look at what we have done in the past. 1980, 79, 80, we confounded the world when, as a national liberation movement which was carrying arms, we laid them down, allowed elections. The first ever national liberation movement in modern history to allow democratic elections as a vehicle to assume office in a transition to independence is ZANU PF. None has ever done that before in Cuba, in China, in Vietnam, in Algeria. None had ever done that. We did it. We confounded the world by giving them a smooth transition out of a situation of generalized warfare. So we've done it before. Now, 2017, we had a difficulty when the final days of the First Republic tried to morph into a monarch, into a dynasty, into a family dynasty. We had difficulties. But because we have got the sinews of a state born out of the national liberation movement, we carried out a transition which even the West was surprised. They had their own agendas about what would come into Zimbabwe.
Which saw others fleeing the country using other unregular ports.
There was no death. In other countries there would have been death. We have been spared of the gravity of a war, a civil war, which America went through. This is an attestation of the capacity of the Zimbabweans to deal with situations. Ever since we developed our own army, which fought and won, we have a strong state, which the people of Zimbabwe want. If there is one of the most loved institutions in this country, is the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. Why? Because it defends the interests of the Zimbabwe people. So we do have a strong state, and a strong state is a guarantee of smooth transitions. Don't worry about it.
We know that at some points in history we have had disturbances where we failed to really transition peacefully.
I've given you the most important milestone.
We know that post-1980 our independence was short-lived before the Gukurawondi started.
Well, look.
And in the run-up, I will run to the beginning of the new millennium in the 2000s.
Yes.
In 2002, when we had the presidential elections, you know the violence that was associated with that election. Know what happened in 2008. More than 300,000 opposition people died, and some were killed, maimed, and all sorts of things happened.
I'm not sure about the figures.
We come to 2017, we saw others as well running the country. They haven't even returned to this date. So this is why I was asking, when this transition is coming, can the people of Zimbabwe be guaranteed that this is going to be peaceful?
Every country goes through bad patches. Development of human society is not linear. And you cannot be guaranteed that everything is going to be spick and span in every society, including America. Nobody holds America to that today, but you went through one. We have not gone through a civil war. There you had cameras in the American Congress 3 years ago when your elections ended in a bad manner. What was happening? The American army was intervening within the corridors of power of America. Every country may have a misstep. These are the challenges of the human course of development. But to hold out Zimbabwe as if it is the only one which should be virtuous and spot free of all the challenges and vagaries that may go on in the course of human development. It's simply wrong. But what I can assure you is that in the history of modern Africa, Zimbabwe has delivered smooth transitions in the most challenging of political and military environments.
Do you aspire to be the president of this country?
No, I have. Look, if I aspired to be the president of this country, I would not have gone to war as a young man. Because going to war means you may die. And many of my colleagues died. I survived because of the lottery of war. I just happened to have been lucky. I'm committed to see Zimbabwe do well. That's what I am there for. Maybe the young people who don't know what we went through are the ones who have got a hunger for being presidents. And it's allowed, because it's precisely why we fought, so that young people can aspire to be leaders of their country. But my nature does not cover that. No, I was the brightest when I went to war in this country at the University of Rhodesia. I sacrificed.
Your party constitution allows you to do that. The Zimbabwean constitution also allows you to aspire to.
That does not come into my mind, because I told you I've been dedicated to the good things which can Zimbabwe become, the prosperity which comes out of the sacrifice of the young people of Zimbabwe who fought the war. And that's why I concentrate much more on the things which I talked about. I've been the prime mover of some of the biggest investment projects, bringing world-class billionaire companies into Zimbabwe. Why do we still have a world-class tobacco industry? I was responsible for that.
What kind of a president would you like to see post President Emerson Mnangagwa? What kind of a person would you like to see?
One who does more of what President Emerson Mnangagwa has done. Because in the last 5 years, he has radically changed the outlook of the national economy by appreciating the importance of capital in the national development agenda of a country. That did not exist in the First Republic. That's why I left. That's why I couldn't last in the government of the First Republic, because of that. And it is also precisely why we may be out of government right now, because I sometimes feel that I can achieve more things when I'm outside of government, because I understand the capital markets of the world and how they can be applied to the resources of Zimbabwe, its human resource index, which is very high, as well as its natural resource, which is God-given, well endowed. If we can get capital to work on those two things, Zimbabwe's prosperity is assured. And that's what occupies my mind more than the quest for anything.
What are the traits and characteristics that you would not want to see in the next leader?
Anti-capital. If you can't appreciate the importance of capital in the development of a national economy, then you cannot deliver the prosperity which so many young people died for in the 60s and 70s. We need open for business in a vibrant and fair manner. More open for business, more Zimbabwe is a friend to all and enemy to none, more engagement and re-engagement with everybody in the world. We can't afford to be an enemy, of any particular country, because we want a congenial environment where we can get capital, produce world-class goods made in Zimbabwe for the global market, and therefore deliver prosperity to Zimbabwe and Africa. Those are the things which matter to me.
Lastly, do you believe maybe as ZANU PF as a party, you have people who are competent enough to meet the things that President Emerson Mnangagwa has done, as you said?
No, let me remind you, if you can rise to the occasion of forming a modern army and challenging the foremost colonial imperial power of the time, Britain, the Rhodesian Cape, and winning, this is the most formidable challenge any country any people could ever face. Zimbabwe rose to that challenge in the 1960s and 70s. Anything else means meat for Zimbabwe. We can do things which no other African country can do. Because if you can win a war against the foremost modern imperial power, supported by the foremost superpower of the world, as the people of Zimbabwe, it means you have demonstrated your capabilities beyond any measure.
Should we expect a civilian or something with a military background?
Look, all the Zimbabwean people have a military background. Remember, we fought a people's war. There is hardly any Zimbabwean family which didn't lose a family during the war. We're burying Mutsvangwa, our national hero, yesterday. You heard what the sister was saying, the one, she was also in the war. The other brother was lost in the war. They don't even know where he got lost in that war. This is the history of Zimbabwe. So you cannot take the military aspect of the Zimbabwean body politic, because we formed an army which is our own. Other African countries, they inherited armies. That's why they are today. Ours, through limb lost, through eye plugged out, through a life lost, we created our own state apparatus. It's a formidable one, it's capable, it's patriotic, and it will make sure that Zimbabwe is always on the straight and narrow.
Ambassador, thank you very much for the time that we have with you.
Thank you.